The blooming crown. In the gilded halls of Oralis, where sunlight danced through crystal panes and shadows whispered secrets along the marbled floors, Princess Elara felt a restlessness she could not name. The crown that awaited her sat untouched in the royal treasury, its golden edges catching the light like a predator's snare. Yet the thought of wearing it filled her with unease, as though the crown would bear her down with its weight, not of metal, but of expectations. The kingdom was hers to rule, yet her heart was heavy with doubt. Every decision, every decree seemed to ripple outward, casting unintended consequences she could not foresee. Her counselors spoke of certainty and power, yet all she felt was the gnawing uncertainty of a future she could not control. One twilight, as the sun bled crimson into the sky, a figure appeared in the royal gardens. Bent with age and cloaked in robes the colour of ash, the hermit moved like a shadow come to life. Elara, drawn by a whisper of curiosity, approached. The figure turned, and his eyes, silver and unblinking, seemed to see into the very marrow of her soul. "Princess," he rasped, his voice like leaves crushed underfoot. "You carry the crown of Oralis, but you lack the wisdom to wield it." Elara stiffened, yet something in the man's tone held her still. "If I lack wisdom, how am I to gain it? Speak plainly, for I have no time for riddles." The hermit chuckled, a sound both mirthful and sorrowful. "Wisdom is not given, child. It is earned. In the valley of eternal spring lies the blooming crown, woven from a flower that holds the truths of the world. If you would claim it, you must prove yourself worthy." Elara frowned, her pride prickling. "Why should I trust the words of a stranger? The valley is but a myth, a tale told to children to keep them from wandering." The hermit leaned closer, and Elara caught a whiff of earth and rain, as though the man carried the essence of the wilderness itself. "Is it myth that binds you here, unable to act? Is it myth that fills your heart with fear of failure? You are already lost, princess. Seek the crown, or remain so." Before she could respond, the hermit turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a single silver leaf that glimmered in the fading light. Elara stood in her chambers that night, turning the leaf over in her fingers. It was unlike anything she had seen, as though moonlight had solidified into a tangible form. The hermit's words echoed in her mind, louder than the distant sounds of the court. She thought of her people, their faces lined with trust she wasn't sure she deserved. By morning, her decision was made. She left the palace quietly, without fanfare or escort. Dressed in a simple cloak, and armed only with her mother's silver lantern, a relic said to guide its bearer through the darkest of places. Elara slipped into the dawn like a shadow escaping the light. The journey began at the edge of the whispering forest, where the trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. The path ahead was unmarked, known only to those with the courage, or folly, to seek it. As she stepped into the forest, a strange stillness enveloped her, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen wings. The silver lantern, though unlit, seemed to pulse faintly in her grip, as though urging her onward. Her thoughts spiraled inward, questioning her resolve, yet something deeper, a thread of quiet determination, held her steady. The forest seemed alive, its shadows shifting like breath. Elara could feel unseen eyes upon her, a presence both curious and mocking. Her steps faltered, but she pressed on, guided by the faint memory of the hermit's words. By the time she emerged from the forest, the sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the land ahead. Before her stretched a vast plain, dotted with wildflowers of every hue. Somewhere beyond it lay the valley of eternal spring, shrouded in mist and mystery. And somewhere within that valley, the blooming crown awaited. Elara set her jaw, her doubts trailing behind her like discarded veils. The journey had begun, and she would see it through, though the path ahead whispered promises of trials she could scarcely imagine. The air was different as Elara crossed the threshold of the valley's outer edge. It carried a strange sweetness, like overripe fruit mingled with the faint tang of rain. The plain gave way to undulating hills, blanketed with grass so green it seemed touched by enchantment. And above it all, the sky shimmered in hues of violet and gold, as if the valley of eternal spring refused to obey the natural order of time. Yet it was not beauty that caught Elara's attention, but the whispers. They began as faint murmurs, weaving through the air like threads of unseen silk. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks, but as the voices grew clearer, she realized they were speaking, not to her, but of her. She comes, bold and blind. One voice sighed. Will she falter? Another mused, its tone lilting with curiosity. Elara's grip tightened on her silver lantern. Show yourselves, she demanded, her voice steady though her heart raced. The whispers only laughed, melting into the wind. The path twisted and turned, narrowing until it was little more than a thread of earth winding between tall golden reeds. Elara pressed on, though her steps felt heavier with each passing moment. The whispers grew louder, not just around her but within her mind. They spoke in fragments, memories of her childhood, the weight of her father's expectations, the fear of failing her people. She tried to block them out, but they sank into her like roots into soil. Every step forward felt like wading through a rising tide of doubt. It was then that the first mirage appeared. Ahead, in a clearing framed by flowering trees, stood a figure she knew well, her mother. The queen's silver hair caught the light like threads of moonlight, and her smile was warm, familiar. Yet something was wrong. Her mother's eyes, usually so full of love, seemed distant, as though she were gazing at something far beyond Elara. "You cannot do this, my daughter," the apparition said, its voice soft yet piercing. "The path you walk is too treacherous. Turn back while you still can." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "You are not real," she whispered, though her voice trembled with doubt. "My mother would never ask me to abandon my people." The figure tilted its head, its smile fading. "And what will your people gain from a queen who stumbles in the dark? You are not ready. Return home." For a moment, Elara wavered. The weight of the apparition's words pressed down on her, and she felt the sting of her own insecurities rise to the surface. But then her gaze fell to the silver lantern in her hand, its soft glow unyielding. "You are a shadow," she said firmly, her voice growing stronger. "A reflection of my fears, nothing more." The apparition's face twisted, and with a hiss, it dissolved into the air, leaving behind only the faint scent of lilacs. The path grew steeper, leading her toward a rocky incline dotted with wildflowers that seemed to hum faintly when she passed. Her legs burned with the effort of climbing, but she dared not pause. The whispers had returned, softer now, but still persistent, threading doubt into her thoughts. It was as she crested the hill that she saw the second mirage. This time it was not a figure, but a vision of Oralis itself, her kingdom in flames. The palace crumbled, its grand spires reduced to ash. Her people fled, their cries echoing in the smoky air. "This is your future," a voice whispered, low and cruel. "Every choice you make will lead to ruin. You cannot save them." Elara's chest tightened, and for a moment she could not breathe. The vision felt so real, the heat of the flames licking at her skin, the acrid scent of smoke filling her lungs. Her doubts surged, threatening to consume her. But then she remembered the hermit's words. "Wisdom is not given, child, it is earned." Clutching the lantern, she stepped forward, directly into the vision. The flames roared around her, yet they did not burn. The cries of her people filled her ears, but she walked on, unyielding. With each step, the illusion began to fade, until she stood once more on the rocky path, the air clear and cool. As the day waned, the whispers grew quieter, almost respectful. Elara's resolve, though tested, had not faltered. The valley seemed to watch her now, its strange beauty shifting as though acknowledging her presence. In the distance, she glimpsed a shimmering haze, like sunlight dancing on water. The heart of the valley and the trials of the fairy lay ahead. But for now, she pressed on, her steps lighter, though the weight of her purpose remained. The shimmering haze grew brighter as Elara approached, rippling like a veil between two worlds. It was a boundary, she realized, marking the entrance to the heart of the valley. As she crossed it, the air shifted. The sweet tang that had accompanied her journey became sharper, like the scent of crushed herbs mingled with rain-soaked earth. And then she saw her, The fairy sat atop a stone carved with ancient runes, her form flickering like a flame. Her wings shimmered in hues that shifted with every breath of wind. Emerald one moment, sapphire the next. She was small, but there was nothing fragile about her. Her eyes, golden and piercing, fixed on Elara with an intensity that made the princess feel as though every secret she held was laid bare. "So the little princess has come," the fairy said, her voice a mixture of mockery and delight. "Do you even know what it is you seek?" "I seek the blooming crown," Elara replied, steady despite the fairy's unnerving gaze. The fairy laughed, a sound like wind chimes caught in a storm. "Ah, the crown! Everyone wants wisdom, yet none understand its price. Do you believe you are worthy, child?" "I will prove it," Elara said. The fairy's smile widened, revealing teeth sharp as thorns. "Oh, I do love a good test." With a wave of her hand, the world around them began to shift. The stone she sat upon sank into the ground, and the land folded itself into a maze of towering flowers, their petals glowing faintly in the twilight. "This is your first trial," the fairy announced. "Find your way through the maze. But beware. Each flower reflects a truth you fear. To pass, you must look and you must see." Elara stepped into the maze, her heart pounding. The flowers were impossibly tall, their petals forming walls that pulsed with a strange inner light. As she moved deeper into the labyrinth, she realized that the glow was not random. Within each petal, images swirled, fragments of her life, moments she had tried to forget. In one flower, she saw herself as a child, standing in the shadow of her father's throne. His voice echoed in her mind. "Strength is what makes a ruler. Doubt is weakness." Another flower showed her people gathered in the square, their faces etched with disappointment. "She cannot lead us," a voice murmured. "She does not have the heart." The weight of these images threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to move forward. She could not let the flower's truths define her. She touched the silver lantern at her side, its soft glow a reminder of her mother's wisdom. "Courage, my daughter, is not the absence of fear, but the will to walk through it." With that thought, she began to see the maze not as a trap, but as a mirror. Each image was a part of her, a truth she needed to face. And as she accepted them, the walls of the maze began to dissolve, petal by petal, until she stood once more before the fairy. "Well done," the fairy said, though her tone suggested she was more amused than impressed. "But a maze is child's play. Let us see how you fare against the lake." With another wave of her hand, the ground shifted again, and Elara found herself standing before a still, glassy lake. Its surface was so smooth it seemed unnatural, and as she gazed into it, her own reflection began to move. The reflection did not mirror her actions. Instead, it stared back with a cruel smile, its eyes sharp with accusation. "You are a pretender," it said, its voice cold and cutting. You wear the mask of a princess, but you are nothing more than a frightened child playing at power. Elara recoiled, but the reflection did not relent. You seek wisdom, yet you cannot even bear the truth of your own flaws. How can you hope to rule a kingdom when you cannot rule your own heart? The words struck deep, and for a moment, Elara wanted to look away, to run. But then she remembered the maze and the truths she had faced there. She knelt by the water, her reflection glaring up at her. "You were right," she said softly. "I am afraid. I have made mistakes. But wisdom is not about being perfect. It is about learning, about growing. I will not let my flaws define me, but neither will I deny them." The reflection's cruel smile faltered, and the water rippled. When it stilled again, her reflection was calm, her own face gazing back with quiet acceptance. The fairy appeared beside her, clapping slowly. "Perhaps you are not so hopeless after all," she said. "But the hardest test is yet to come." With another wave of her hand, the lake vanished, replaced by a single winding path that led into the heart of the valley. The fairy's voice was softer now, almost kind. "At the end of this path lies the blooming crown. But wisdom is a burden, not a gift. If you take it, there is no turning back." Elara straightened, her resolve firm. "I came knowing the cost. I will see this through." The fairy's eyes glimmered, and for the first time she smiled, not with mockery, but with something akin to respect. "Then go, princess, the crown awaits." And so Elara stepped forward, the whispers of the valley fading behind her as she walked toward the unknown. The path before Elara seemed to stretch endlessly, winding through a landscape both haunting and serene. The air was heavier here, tinged with the scent of blooming flowers and something deeper, something ancient. Each step felt significant, as though the valley itself was holding its breath, watching her progress. The terrain shifted with an unsettling fluidity. At times, she walked through groves where the trees bore blossoms of silver and gold, their branches bowing under the weight of their strange fruits. At others, the ground seemed to shimmer like liquid glass, reflecting the endless sky above. The whispers had stilled, but an eerie quiet had taken their place, a silence that pressed against her thoughts. Ahead, a glow began to pierce the mist, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step. Elara's heart quickened. She knew she was nearing the heart of the valley, the place where the blooming crown waited. Yet the light did not soothe her. It felt too bright, too knowing, as though it sought to unravel the last of her defenses. As she approached, the path widened into a clearing unlike anything she had seen. The ground was covered in a soft carpet of moss that seemed to pulse faintly, alive with its own rhythm. At the center of the clearing stood a single tree, its trunk twisted and ancient, its branches adorned with flowers that glowed with an inner light. Nestled among the blossoms was the crown. The blooming crown was not what she had imagined. It was not grand or ornate, but delicate, almost fragile. Its petals shimmered with colors that shifted constantly, as though the crown itself were alive, breathing. Elara felt drawn to it, yet as she stepped forward, a familiar voice halted her. "Do you truly understand what you are asking for?" The fairy appeared once more, her form less solid than before, as if the valley itself had begun to consume her. Her golden eyes were unreadable, her expression neither mocking nor kind. The blooming crown does not simply grant wisdom. It reveals truths, truths that cannot be unseen, cannot be forgotten. Are you prepared for that? Elara met the fairy's gaze, her grip tightening on the silver lantern. "I am." The fairy tilted her head, studying her. "Then answer this. What is the cost of true wisdom?" Elara paused. The question was deceptively simple, yet she could feel its weight. Memories of her journey flickered through her mind, the maze, the lake, the whispers. She thought of the truths she had faced, the doubts she had carried. Finally she spoke. "The cost of wisdom," she said slowly, "is the courage to bear the truths it reveals, to see the world as it is, not as I wish it to be, and to carry that understanding, no matter how heavy." The fairy's form flickered, her expression unreadable. "And what will you do with this wisdom, princess? Will you hoard it, or will you use it, knowing it may cost you more than you can bear?" Elara hesitated, but only for a moment. "I will use it, for my people, for my kingdom. Not because it is easy, but because it is right." The fairy stared at her for a long moment, and then for the first time she smiled. It was not a mocking smile or a sly one, but something softer, almost wistful. "Perhaps you are ready after all." With a wave of her hand, the fairy stepped aside, and the crown lowered itself gently into Elara's reach. As the princess approached, she could feel its power thrumming in the air, a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. She hesitated for only a moment before lifting the blooming crown and placing it on her head. The effect was immediate. A rush of light and sound filled her senses, too vast to comprehend. Images flooded her mind, not just of her own life, but of countless lives, countless choices, victories and failures, joys and sorrows. She saw her kingdom as it truly was, its strengths and its flaws laid bare. She saw the faces of her people, their hopes and fears entwined with her own. And she saw herself not as a perfect ruler, but as a flawed human one, capable of growth and change. The weight of it was staggering, yet she did not falter. She stood tall, letting the truths settle within her, letting them become a part of her. When the light faded, the fairy was gone, and the valley was still. Elara felt different, heavier, yet lighter all at once. The blooming crown rested on her head, its petals warm against her skin. She knew now that her journey was far from over. Wisdom was not a destination, but a path, one she would walk for the rest of her days. With the lantern in her hand and the crown upon her head, Elara turned and began the long journey back to Auralis. The valley watched her go, silent but knowing, its trials completed, its truths revealed. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Elara walked it with a newfound clarity, her steps steady, her purpose clear. The return journey from the valley was unlike the descent. The landscape remained eerily beautiful, but its enchantment no longer held mystery or menace. Elara walked with a steady purpose, her steps light despite the weight of the blooming crown resting upon her brow. It had become a part of her now, its truths interwoven with her thoughts, its power both humbling and immense. Yet the silence of the valley clung to her. Gone were the whispers that had haunted her steps, replaced by a deeper stillness. This was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something vast, something timeless. The valley seemed to exhale as she left its boundaries, its role fulfilled, its secrets left behind, except for the ones she now carried. As she emerged from the shimmering haze that marked the valley's threshold, the world seemed sharper, more vivid. The sun burned brighter, the wind carried subtler scents, and even the distant murmur of a brook felt layered with meaning. Every detail seemed to speak, and she understood it in ways she never had before. Elara paused by the brook to drink, her reflection rippling on the water's surface. She gazed at the woman staring back at her, a queen now, though the coronation had not yet occurred. The crown glimmered faintly, its petals shifting colours like whispers of emotion. She touched it lightly, feeling its warmth, its hum. It was alive in a way, and it reminded her of the burden she had taken on. For with the wisdom it bestowed came the realization of all she had yet to learn. The crown had not made her infallible. It had made her aware of her flaws, of her strengths, of the delicate balance she must maintain to lead her kingdom. And she felt the weight of it, a burden she accepted but could never set down. The whispering forest greeted her next, its ancient trees swaying gently in the breeze. The path was easier now, the shadows no longer shifting with hidden malice, but with quiet reverence. She felt their gaze upon her, not as a challenge, but as an acknowledgement. She had passed through the valley, had faced its truths, and emerged changed. As she neared the edge of the forest, a familiar voice called to her. "Well, well, the little princess returns." Elara turned to see the fairy, Thistle, perched upon a low branch. Her wings shimmered faintly in the dappled light, and her expression was unreadable. "I was curious if you'd make it back," Thistle said, tilting her head. "Many who claim the blooming crown find its weight too great to bear." Elara met her gaze evenly. "The weight is heavy, but it is mine to carry." Thistle's lips curved into a faint smile. Spoken like someone who understands at last. She leapt lightly from the branch, hovering before Elara. But tell me, princess, no queen, what will you do with this wisdom now that you have it? Elara considered the question, the answer clear yet profound. I will serve. My people deserve a ruler who sees them as they are, not as I wish them to be. I will guide them, not with certainty, but with understanding. The fairy studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Perhaps you are ready after all. And with that, she vanished, her laughter lingering in the air like a faint melody. When Elara finally returned to Oralis, the palace gates stood open, the royal guards stunned by her solitary approach. Word of her journey spread quickly, and soon the courtiers and advisors gathered in the great hall, their murmurs filling the space. Elara entered, her steps unhurried, her presence commanding. The blooming crown upon her head silenced the room. Its glow was soft but undeniable, its petals shifting as though alive. She ascended the dais and turned to face her people, her voice steady as she addressed them. I left this palace in doubt, uncertain of my place and my purpose, but I return now with clarity. The journey I undertook was not for me alone. It was for all of us. The truths I have learned, the wisdom I now carry, belong to the kingdom, not just the crown. Her words echoed through the hall, and she saw the expressions of her people change. The doubt they had once felt was replaced with something stronger: hope, trust. The blooming crown had not only transformed Elara, it had given her people something to believe in. In the days that followed, Elara's rule began anew. She faced challenges with a calm resolve, her decisions guided by the truths she had embraced. She understood now that wisdom was not about certainty, but about clarity, about seeing the world as it truly was and having the courage to act within it. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the weight of the crown felt heaviest, she would think of the valley. Its whispers still lingered at the edges of her mind, a reminder that wisdom was not a final destination, but a path she must walk every day. And so, the princess who had doubted her place became the queen who embraced it. Her journey a story whispered across Oralis, a tale of courage, clarity, and the enduring bloom of wisdom.